Hello, this is S.K. Williams, and today I would like to talk to you about the problem with militant atheism. The same militant atheism that claims that it is wrong to call them militant because they are not violent, and that the term militant atheism was invented by theists to demonize atheists. But they're not violent because they're not throwing bombs at people, they're not killing people. Well, yes, they are. And they have historically. However, do keep in mind that the idea that theists created the term militant atheism simply to vilify atheists is an odd one, since when the new atheism began, people like Richard Dawkins were outright stating, "I am a militant atheist," and the entire atheist community who followed Dawkins and Hitchens and Harris, and to an extent Dennett, who was never quite as popular, the four horsemen of the new atheism, the term was actually one they applied to themselves. The term also was invented in the Soviet Union by the League of Militant Atheists, also translated the League of Militant Godless. It's the same thing, it's a different translation from the Russian. And the term was very much associated with violence in the Soviet Union, because quite contrary to the mythology of the modern-day self-declared skeptic community, the idea that no one has ever killed in the name of atheism is false. People have killed in the name of atheism, especially when you consider that when they say someone is killed in the name of religion, they are comparing a complex belief system to atheism, which they insist is a mere lack of belief in a god. The problem, of course, is one of those multifaceted ones that you quite often encounter when you're dealing with bullies, and the modern-day atheist movement is indeed a movement based on bullying. And that is that there are multiple different aspects that are actually wrong about what they're saying, which manages to cover other things. The first being that atheism is not a lack of belief in a god. Atheism is a belief that no gods exist. The idea that atheism is a lack of belief in a god goes back to Anthony Flew in the 1970s when he wrote The Presumption of Atheism. Now, a lot of modern-day atheists like to claim that this isn't true, and will cite 19th century free thought movement authors as also defining atheism as a lack of belief in God, or early 20th century. Rationality Rules did a video on this. He lied, of course, but he nevertheless is used as evidence. One of the most egregious lies he told was that Bertrand Russell's Teapots was about saying how atheists aren't making any claims and have no burden of proof, and that Bertrand Russell was saying that atheism is a lack of belief in a god. But the very part that he quoted from Russell to make that point wasn't saying that at all, and it's not a matter of picking it out of context. Even the part he quoted doesn't say that. But even though people in the modern-day self-declared skeptic community insist they are indeed skeptics, the people who listened to Rationality Rules believed what he said was true. Look, he showed evidence, that is definitely what he said, and they didn't apply any critical thinking to it. Bertrand Russell was not saying, some people, imagine a world in which some people are claiming invisible teapots orbit between Earth and Mars. The burden of proof would be on them, not on the people who lack belief in it, and making an analogy to atheism, where atheists lack belief in a god and have no burden of proof. Rather, his point was that it would be absurd to believe that teapots were orbiting between the Earth and Mars. So absurd that all rational people would reject this idea, not lack belief in it, reject it. And if anyone were to believe that, they would be considered insane. But if imagine that a really old book that everyone reveres said so, and we've all been taught that that book is the infallible word of God, and that we've all grown up with generations of people believing it, so that the majority of people believe it, and it is normal and customary to believe it, then even though it is still an insane idea, people would nevertheless be seen as insane for rejecting it. His actual point was that God clearly and plainly and obviously and self-evidently does not exist. Atheists are simply rational adults in the room pointing out the obvious fact and are being called irrational for being rational. His point was not that atheists lack belief in a God, are making no claims, and have no burden of proof. And the same is said of other writers, although to them, the cherry-picking that rationality rules or others did is at least more sensible, because you could read those as saying that if you're predisposed, and a lot of atheist arguments do rely on priming people to be predisposed to what they're saying. But the problem is that they don't actually understand Christianity. I know that most of them will say that they used to be Christians. In fact, they used to be devout Christians. Oddly, they also like saying they left it as small children at 7 because they were oh so brilliant that they realized religion was a lie at 7 years old, and of course never went back. I don't really believe that a lot of them are becoming atheists at 7 years old. Telling them that, though, of course, means that I'm revealing the shallowness of my thinking and the depths of my religious indoctrination. Indoctrination to them, of course, means brainwashing. But am I really exposing how I'm a shallow thinker and I've been deeply religiously indoctrinated for rejecting that people are telling me the truth when they're telling me all the same things? I realize that they're going to tell me that some people who have common shared experiences or arrive at the same conclusions based on the same evidence, and that I obviously haven't considered that possibility. But when you're all saying that you left religion not only as a child, but specifically at the age of 7, it becomes a bit harder to believe, especially when you say things that are just patently not true about the churches you went to. And please, I already know that there are 64,000 denominations of Christianity that all began through church splits over disagreements on how to interpret the Bible. I know that there's no churches agree with each other and no two Christians agree, and it's actually Christianities, plural. What they don't seem to understand is no church teaches what they claim they do that I'm objecting to, quite often. If some churches do teach what they're saying, it is still not the majority. And you can't justify condemning Christianity as false or evil or immoral just because a church teaches something, much less when none of them do. And that I really don't think using exactly the same terminology to describe your deconversion from religion convinces me that you have. Of course, I'm an idiot with bad grammar. After all, when I type, I randomly capitalize words, which proves that I'm typing while drunk. It also proves that I never learned basic grammar at my Christian homeschool and deserve ridicule. These are the same people who claim that religion is cruel because it allows you to bypass common human empathy. Empathy is the source of morality, and atheists with no religion cannot bypass empathy, and that is why atheists are more empathetic, more compassionate, and more moral than religious people, even though atheists are wrongfully accused of being immoral. And in fact, it's the opposite. They're the moral ones. Well, and they will even tell you that Christianity hurts people's mental health. Christianity causes people to internalize anxieties and fears and depressions, precisely because Christians think you can just pray away your problems, and if you still have problems that you're working through, it obviously means you're not believing the right things, you're not believing hard enough, and you're not praying hard enough. It's your own fault for choosing to sin, and people who are struggling with these problems can't go to other Christians because they will be called sinners and heretics, and this will cause them to internalize their anxieties and fears and depression, and Christianity clearly destroys people's confidence in themselves and makes their mental health worse, while atheists, filled with empathy, filled with compassion, filled with kindness would realize that people are struggling and they need compassion and support. And that is why atheists would never make fun of the disabled like those evil, vile, awful Christians do, which is why when they tell me that I'm randomly capitalizing words, they are telling the truth. I clearly am an idiot who never learned proper grammar, and I'm clearly typing while drunk because I randomly capitalize words, and I deserve ridicule for it. Of course, I've told them that I'm legally blind and dyslexic. I've told them that it's not actually a random capitalization, but that I capitalize nouns, modifiers, and certain key terms. That this is based on an older style of English, not Old English, older style of English, and that I use it to help my eyes focus. But I'm obviously lying when I say that, since none of them have discerned a pattern, and since all atheists are free thinkers, they're certainly not a tribe. It's not like one of them made fun of me for randomly capitalizing words and the others just jumped on the bandwagon. That's how the religious operate, and if I were to say they do it, well, I'm projecting my faults as a religious person onto them. Obviously, the atheists who are saying that I'm randomly capitalizing words are seeing it individually. So every time I hear word for word the same thing, what's the deal with the random capitals? Or, I just gotta know, what's the deal with the random capitals? Or, after they copy and paste, after they reveal their unique original research with problems of the Bible and why it can't possibly be true, ending it with, I hope this helps with your confusion. But if it doesn't, I can retype it with random capitals like you prefer. I really do get benefit from them telling me that I randomly capitalize words. I should stop lying about being legally blind and being dyslexic and having a pattern. Obviously, so many free thinkers are calling it random capitals it must be. Not a one of them has discerned a pattern. They can't possibly be just all ganging up on me. Each one's a free thinker with nothing in common with other atheists but their lack of belief in a God, so when they make fun of me for randomly capitalizing words, it's obvious that I randomly capitalize words, and I'm just an idiot, and I deserve ridicule, and I clearly can't be disabled, because atheists filled with empathy and compassion would never, ever ridicule the disabled. As you can see, I've had a long history with the self-declared skeptic community. I know they're not really compassionate. I know they're not really filled with empathy. They are in fact cruel and hateful. Though I would like to point out that I'm not saying atheists are cruel and hateful. One of the other things that I have a problem with when conveying this information is they always say that I'm generalizing all atheists. Well, even if I am, that still doesn't make all of my concerns illegitimate. But I'm not. However, the modern-day skeptic community, as it calls itself, is actually following a religion called secular humanism. Secular humanism, once upon a time, called itself a religion. If you go back to the 1933 Humanist Manifesto, for example, it clearly states that humanism is a religion. This was not a bizarre or strange choice, although they will use those words to delegitimize calling what they are a religion, and there really is no difference between the religious humanism and secular humanism. It's not like religious humanists believe in a god, although some atheists like to lie about that, claiming that Raymond Bragg wrote the Humanist Manifesto and was a Unitarian minister, which means he was a Christian who believed in God, proving that it is a philosophy, not a religion, and that people of all religions can hold to it. But that's a lie. Raymond Bragg was, in fact, an atheist. It is true that he was a Unitarian and that the Unitarians were a Christian church, but he, John Dietrich, and a few others managed to rise in the ranks and attempted to transform the Unitarian church into a humanist church. And they partially succeeded, but not. That's around the time when they were building ethical societies and humanist churches, and they did call them that. And if you look at the writings of the earlier secularists or people within the rationalist movement, they definitely called themselves a new religion. Charles Bradley, George Jacob Holyoake, and Besant all used the term, we are creating a new religion. And yet the modern-day skeptic community insists it's not a religion. In fact, a lot of them insist they're not humans, and some of them may not actually think of themselves as humans. but they've listened to other atheists where they got their ideas. They're not really truth seekers. You know that for a reason they never address. The commonality of terminology. Once they use the term Vergishgallen, or if they declare God doesn't exist and you were to ask them to prove God doesn't exist, insist that you prove Bigfoot doesn't exist to make a point that you can't prove a negative, and it's the one making the claim that has the burden of proof. Or when they talk about the flying spaghetti monster complete with the Rastafarian religion and that prayer that's supposed to ridicule the other prayer, may his noodly pinches bless you, ramen. They are very plainly, very clearly, very obviously saying, I belong to a tribal religion, even though they won't say that in words. They will instead use their words to say, I have no religion, I have nothing in common with other atheists but a lack of belief in a God. And even if you point out that they are on atheist blogs or YouTube channels, they will say, I watch a lot of different YouTube channels, even ones I disagree with, or apply that to blogs or what have you. And let's face reality. They listen to atheist channels and repeat what they have been told, and they are not simply repeating the same conclusions based upon the same facts. They are using exactly the same terminology to make their point. Even if the facts that they were presenting were accurate, it is not likely that they would describe those facts using the same terms unless influenced by the same sources. And let's face it, most of the modern popular atheists are secular humanists, even the ones that were popular a few years ago and still retain some following. Richard Dawkins is a secular humanist and belongs to many secular humanist organizations. In fact, the Richard Dawkins Foundation merged with the Council for Secular Humanism to become the Center for Inquiry, which is a premier source for a lot of the propaganda that you've been using. The Council for Secular Humanism itself broke off of the American Humanist Association, which itself, while it didn't exactly break off of, was an attempt to create an American version of the National Secular Society founded by Charles Bradlaugh. Prometheus Press is owned by the same parent company that owns the American Humanist Association. Hamet Mehta, who is a member of the American Humanist Association, as well as the Center for Inquiry, is also the president of the Secular Student Alliance, which on its own website states that it wishes to promote humanist values. Sam Harris outright stated that humanist values should be promoted in his books. So did the late Christopher Hitchens. So did Daniel Dennett in various statements. So has Steven Pinker and others. And even if the YouTube channel presenters that they listen to don't say that, they are nevertheless quoting people who did. People like Matt Dillahunty, people like R. Raw. And all they're really doing is presenting the same arguments that were presented 20 years ago by these people. Not again, it's not just looking at the facts and evidence and arriving at the same conclusion independently based upon the evidence, because they're using the same terminology. You can't get them to use the same terminology and expect them to believe that it is a coincidence. What's more, quite often their arguments aren't based on facts and evidence, they're based on lies and errors. For example, you will quite often hear them say that the abolition movement is something Christians take credit for, but they do this falsely, since Christians were not the ones promoting the abolition of slavery. It was atheists, agnostics, and deists motivated by the Enlightenment. And only sometime later did some Christians begin to join up. But they were a minority, and they were not just a minority of churches, since, according to them, all churches supported slavery until around 1840. The Christians who became abolitionists were all from liberal churches. And even then, the liberal churches officially endorse slavery, and this is because the Bible itself condones slavery. Therefore, all Christian churches believing in the Bible thought slavery was good and the will of God. So really, even in those liberal churches, the majority of people supported slavery, and it was only a minority who had largely abandoned their Christian faith and were far closer to free thinkers that were doing so. Oh, they still considered themselves Christians, but they weren't, and their church definitely supported slavery. This is, of course, nonsense. There were churches prior to 1840 that opposed slavery, quite contrary to what the divine prophet Hector Abelos Most Holy said. There were plenty of people from various churches that opposed slavery. The Catholic Church itself opposed the enslavement of people based upon race. And the history is far more complex. And even all of their free-thought heroes, who were definitely not Christian, like William Lloyd Garrison, were actually Christians, irrespective of them saying otherwise. And therein lies the problem, because you keep seeing these statements being made that you can actually trace not just back to people like Sam Harris or Richard Dawkins, but to people living in the late 19th and early 20th century. Because the modern-day skeptic community, contrary to what it claims, is actually not about skepticism. It is about secular humanism. It is a religion, and the ideas that are being promoted are not simply a lack of belief in a God. It's not even just a belief that no God exists. It is a complex system of ideas that is itself a form of religion. And for those who say it can't be a form of religion because it is not theistic, and by definition, a religion must have a God, since you can quote, say, a dictionary definition that says religion is belief in and worship of gods and supernatural powers. You have to remember that Sam Harris, Christopher Hitchens, Richard Dawkins have all called Marxist communism a form of religion. Sam Harris even said that we should not only remove communism and all of the killings done and atrocities committed by communist nations from the ledger of atheist crimes, but that we should place them in the religion ledger, meaning that religious people are to blame for all of the atrocities committed in the Soviet Union and in Communist China and other communist nations, since Marxist communism is a form of religion, thus religion, not atheism, thus reason and science are to blame. And none of the people who say that you can't be an atheist and religious, since by definition religion is belief in and worship of gods and supernatural powers, bat an eye at Sam Harris saying that Marxist communism is a religion and all of its atrocities only prove religion is evil at all. In fact, they largely agree with that assessment. Well, if atheists can't be religious because religion is belief in and worship of gods and supernatural powers, then Marxist communism cannot be a religion. Some, of course, try and say maybe it's not a religion, but it's like a religion, and it has all the traits of a religion, and that's what makes it bad. But how would the secularism they're promoting lack those features? Really, they're just saying everything evil is religious, so they can exonerate atheism and blame religion. Because in their minds, atheism is the opposite of religion. But atheism is not the opposite of religion. Atheism is the opposite of theism. If you believe God exists, you are a theist. But it doesn't tell you what religion you are. Atheism is a belief that no God exists. It is not a lack of belief. And ultimately, if you're going to say theism is evil because religion has committed evil acts, and by religion you mean people who believe in a God have committed acts based upon their beliefs, plural, about a God. If you're going to include religion in an indictment for theism, then you must also say that atheistic ideologies, whether you call them a religion or not, would indict atheism in the same way. Because ultimately, no one has ever killed in the name of theism if you limit theism to purely belief that a God exists. Of course, members of the self-declared skeptic community who are so proud of being the people who apply critical thinking never listen to what it is that I'm saying and will simply say, oh yeah, what about the Crusades? What about the Inquisition? What about killing Native Americans? What about those residential schools in Canada? What about 9/11? Obviously, religion has killed people. Well, I didn't say religion, I said theism. Well, obviously, theism has killed people since these people believed in God and thought they were doing God's will. But they did not do those things simply because they believed a God existed, nothing more, nothing less. You see, you can't say, because people kill in the name of religion, this means they kill in the name of theism, because religion is not theism. Religion, even if we went by the belief in and worship of gods and supernatural powers definition, is more than that. Accepting that all religions worship a god or gods and worship the supernatural, you're still stuck with the fact that the Crusades were not fought by the Crusaders simply because they believed a God existed. Even if you say they thought they were doing that God's will, that is still adding the will of God to belief in God's existence. In much the same way as saying that someone killed in the name of an atheist ideology would still implicate atheism. If you're going to say that we only judge atheism if people kill in the name of lacking belief in a God with nothing else added, then you're simply being dishonest. Especially since, again, atheism is not a lack of belief in a God. It is a belief that no God exists. And while it may or may not be true that no one has ever killed specifically in the name of believing no God exists, only they have killed in the name of believing no God exists, and that belief in God is wrong. That means they've killed in the name of atheism, because you can't say that theism shall be judged by the beliefs added to theism. But atheism must only be judged as atheism and nothing else, without being dishonest. And ultimately, the self-declared skeptic community is dishonest. The Soviet Union really did kill to promote atheism and an atheist ideology. They wanted everyone to be an atheist. Communist China has done the same thing. So have all the communist countries. And it's not just Stalin in the Soviet Union. Lenin did this. Khrushchev was arguably worse about this than Stalin. There were several Soviet leaders who killed specifically to promote atheism and an atheist ideology. To say they did not kill in the name of atheism, and then to turn around and say religion is evil because 9/11 and Crusade and Inquisition is rather absurd when you think about it. Especially considering they get basic facts wrong, like saying that the Catholic Church is to blame for the deaths in the Canadian residential schools, when that was actually the Canadian government's fault, not the Church's fault. And I am aware that the churches apologized, they always do, and the self-declared skeptic community always takes those apologies not as heartfelt apologies and forgives them, but as confessions of guilt that they can now use to wave as a flag saying they definitely are guilty. They murdered people in residential schools. They wanted to commit genocide against natives in residential schools and thus use it forever. The problem is that the atheist community never apologizes for all the evil it's done, and it has done a great deal of evil. That is why the historiography of militant atheism and the new atheism is dedicated in large part to reminding us that religion is evil, whilst telling us that it is so unfair if you dare blame atheism for various things that clearly had nothing to do with atheism and were, quite often they will even say, were clearly actually because of religion. Seriously, there are even atheist arguments out there that blame Stalin, an avowed atheist, and all of his cruelty on religion. They claim that because he went to an Orthodox seminary and because he was raised in the Russian Orthodox Church, this proves that his dogmatism, authoritarianism, and desire for brutality and willingness to use brutality came from religion, and thus his religion's fault. And of course, since Marxism itself is a form of religion, atheism can't be blamed. And they do the same with a certain man who I'm going to call Charlie Chaplin. Because Charlie Chaplin did a movie called The Dictator, and it was a parody of this man, so Charlie Chaplin. The same thing about Charlie Chaplin. Charlie Chaplin was a devout Catholic who went against the elves. Yes, that is indeed what I said, the elves. I am, of course, having to appease Al Gore and his rhythm. That's why some of my word choices are odd, and why I am replacing certain words with other words. Nevertheless, Charlie Chaplin against the elves, because Charlie Chaplin was a devout Catholic, and both Catholic and Protestants had deep-seated anti-Elvinism that were actually ingrained dogmas of their faith that both Protestants and Catholics taught as official doctrine, and that the Catholic Church itself didn't change these doctrines until the 1960s when they had an official Church Congress of Vatican II. By the way, you know how I keep saying that the skeptic community keeps ignoring the point about terminology? Vatican II was a church council. It was not an official church congress. I don't care that they'll say it means the same thing. It's rather like saying that Christians in America won't listen to anything their priest didn't tell them when they're talking about evangelicals. I've actually seen this happen. They'll look at some evangelicals and say, these evangelical Christians, they're not going to listen to anything unless their priest tells it to them. Well, evangelicals don't have priests. They have pastors. But they don't have priests. And you're always told by the atheist community, or the skeptic community, as they falsely call themselves, that this is just a job title difference. That the only difference between pastor and priest is a job title. It's the same thing. It's just a job title difference. Well, even if it were just a job title difference, even if there were no difference between a priest and a pastor, it's just a different job title, you're still using the wrong job title. And you're using the wrong job title because you heard other atheists use the wrong job title. Not that it matters, as in this case it's actually wrong. A priest is not the same thing as a pastor. And while in Catholicism you can call a priest a pastor, it is wrong to call an evangelical Christian pastor a priest. When I say wrong, I'm not saying grievous sin. I'm saying it is incorrect. A priest is one who offers sacrifice at an altar, and a Catholic priest's primary function is not to preach sermons. It is to offer the sacrifice of the Mass. Evangelicals don't believe in the sacrifice of the Mass. To them, the Lord's Supper is a symbolic act. And most of the time, the pastor does not actually administer communion. Someone else does, specifically to avoid the connotation that they are priests. They are not priests. They do not offer anything on an altar for propitiation of sins, and you are simply incorrect for calling them that. It is not simply a job title difference. Incidentally, an official church congress would not be the same thing as a church council either, but I'm not going to go into details. The point that I'm making is a very simple one. It's very straightforward. The self-declared skeptic community doesn't care about being accurate or truthful or correct. It only cares about... By the way, before I say this, I already know the lame joke. Christianity does not need atheists to make it look bad. Christianity does that all by itself. Hardy har har, har har har, ha 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 ha, how how how. The self-declared skeptic community just wants to make Christianity look bad. And that joke I just told you is what they use to dismiss that criticism. Because they think repeating that joke somehow proves them right. even though, in reality, repeating that joke proves my point, because they are once again simply repeating something they heard other atheists say, word for word, and I can't believe that they are just arriving at that conclusion on their own. And therein lies the issue. Because a lot of the material that they are quoting from it does come from the late 19th and early 20th century. Joseph McCabe is one of the immediate sources of a lot of this. McCabe did come up with some material on his own, but he also served as a compiler of claims others made, putting them into volumes that other people could then read more effectively if you want to put out the propaganda, because the information is now contained in a single volume rather than dispersed over several publications. Joseph McCabe wrote, for instance, the Biographical Dictionary of Modern Rationalists. He also wrote the Biographical Encyclopedia of Modern Rationalists, which was a revision of the earlier work. These materials are important because they are the ones that the Freedom from Religion Foundation, another secular humanist foundation, uses when they promote their free thought heroes. They go to Joseph McCabe's Biographical Dictionary and pick free thinkers who were totally not Christian to put on their site and largely just abridge and revise what McCabe said. That is why, for instance, William Lloyd Garrison is called a deist on the Freedom from Religion website page about him, when in reality he was not a deist. Joseph McCabe, of course, doesn't actually call him a deist either. He calls him a non-Christian theist, but that was one of the modifications as they went forward. Of course, that's a lie too. William Lloyd Garrison was actually a Christian. He was not a non-Christian theist, and he certainly wasn't a deist. But that's what they call him. And it goes back to McCabe. Now, McCabe did not come up with that claim. The earliest I can see, that I have found at least, that refers to William Lloyd Garrison as anything other than a Christian is Charles Bradlaugh. Charles Bradlaugh, however, also claimed that William Wilberforce was not a Christian. His argument there being that the Bible condones slavery, Wilberforce fought against it, therefore he can't have been a Christian. This is also, however, how their ideas pass. Bradlaugh came up with the idea. McCabe put it in his books, complete with other claims from others, and other people quote McCabe. And I will be doing a video on how this transmission occurred more smoothly. But that's the point that I'm making right now. And you'll see people like the Freedom from Religion Foundation keeping these myths and legends alive year after year after year, up until the present day. It is actually a tradition. And the traditional historiography, while it has been changed because of social conditions, is at its core the same one you will find in people like H.G. Wells, in Julian Huxley, who, by the way, created UNESCO specifically to promote the new religion of humanism. Erich Fromm, a socialist philosopher who came up with socialist humanism. You will find many of these people actually promoting socialism or outright communism as well, because they've always been connected. The religion of humanity created by Auguste Comte, which basically is secular humanism today, itself is the source for logical positivism. This is why so many atheists in the past, when the new atheism got started, were always saying empirical evidence is the only valid evidence. It goes back to Auguste Comte. And yet, when you hear modern-day members of the self-declared skeptic community talk, they keep denying that atheism has any history other than the fact that there have always been people who lack faith in a God, while they themselves will frequently quote from people like Bertrand Russell, by people like Charles Bradlaugh, and people like Joseph McCabe, although McCabe's name is hardly ever used. Mostly it's just the things McCabe said being promoted. And quite often, the person quoting him doesn't necessarily know they're quoting McCabe because they're quoting an article they read on Free Inquiry that quoted McCabe. Or they're quoting an article from Free Inquiry that quotes an article from the earlier Council from Secular Humanism that quotes an earlier article from the American Humanist Association that quotes McCabe. And so on. And that is how their information is transmitted. And that's sort of the issue. They won't admit that history. And they won't admit the fact that they have actually lied a good deal about various things. Like they will cite Gibbon's mythology about how Christianity caused the fall of the Roman Empire. Or they will say that Christianity created the Dark Ages by destroying pagan knowledge. And this myth doesn't make any sense if you know anything about history. But it is nevertheless popular. It's what you get when you see people like A.C. Grayling come along and revive it, claiming that the Muslims preserved Greek and Roman knowledge, while the Christians destroyed it, and this gave us the Islamic Golden Age. And it was at the time that the Muslims began destroying it that we saw them fall. They invaded Constantinople, and then the Greeks, who had preserved the Greek and Roman knowledge as well, had to flee Constantinople, and then they gave their knowledge to the Christians who hadn't seen it for 1,000 years or so. And after the Greeks reintroduced the Christians to their knowledge, you got the Renaissance, and that led to the Enlightenment, which broke the back of religion and brought in science and all that. And this mythology is clearly designed to demonize Christians. And it operates under the assumption that Christians hate Muslims. So Muslims are made somewhat of a hero in the story because the Muslims, the people Christians hate, are preserving that knowledge. And it is only when the Muslims start destroying the knowledge that Christians get it back. But even then, Christians get it back from the Greeks. Well, here's the problem with that. The way A.C. Grayling tells it, which is also the way Dark Matter 2525 tells it on his channel in his Theft of Our Values video, where he acts as if when Constantinople fell, the Greeks went to Europe and the Greeks introduced this information to Christians. The way it's being presented, the Greeks are very clearly a distinct group, separate from the Muslims or the Christians. They are not Muslims, they are not Christians, they are Greeks. The problem is, the Greeks are Christians. Constantinople was named after Emperor Constantine, the first Christian emperor. A lot of atheists in the self-declared skeptic community ridicule me for saying that Constantine didn't rule the Byzantine Empire. He ruled the Roman Empire from Rome, but no, he ruled the Roman Empire from Constantinople, which he had named after himself. And the Byzantine Empire was the Eastern Roman Empire. It never called itself the Byzantine Empire. Dark Matter 2525, as well as A.C. Grayling, which is primarily his source, simply lied about the situation by pretending the Greeks lived in Constantinople and acting like the Greeks were not Christians. Of course, you could still say that doesn't change the fact that in Western Europe, Christians destroyed all this knowledge. Well, no, they didn't. That's a myth. That never happened. Just like it's not really true that Christians necessarily hate all Muslims. I don't care that some Christians do, or other Christians disagree. It's wrong to justify your hatred of Christianity by claiming they hate certain groups if they don't. And even if you can find some Christians who do fit your description, it's wrong to justify your hatred of all Christians based on what a handful of them do. Which is why the Triple K organization, who wore those white robes and didn't like people of certain darker skin color, aren't a good argument either, and yet the same self-declared skeptics who use critical thinking will always respond the same way. They will say that the Triple K was a Christian organization, and that the Christian religion caused it, and Christians should feel shame, and this is a reason to not believe in Christianity. If you were to point out that this is absurd because not all Christians supported the Triple K, and some were even targeted by the Triple K. The Catholic Church was targeted by the Triple K. they will say that Christianity has a long history of one type of Christians fighting another type of Christians. They act as if you're saying the Triple K couldn't have possibly been Christian because they attacked other Christians. And they're responding to that by saying, you can't say the Triple K aren't true Christians because they attacked Christians, because Christians have a long history of hating other Christians. But that's not what I said. Even if I were to accept that the Triple K were indeed true Christians, that doesn't change the fact that they attacked Christian groups like the Catholic Church. You cannot blame the Catholic Church with the creation of the Triple K. Saying they all have the same religion because they're all Christian does not make the Catholic Church to blame either. And pretending I said something I didn't doesn't either. And incidentally, even if I were to say the Triple K were not really Christian, that is not necessarily committing the no true Scotsman fallacy. You see, you might have a valid reason to reject them as Christian, but the skeptic community, as it calls itself, has this weird idea that since Christianity is so divided, and since no two Christian churches agree on everything, the only way to determine who is and is not Christian is if someone calls themselves a Christian. And from there, if they can find even one group that believes something, all Christianity is forever tarnished and tainted and guilty. And that it's perfectly valid to criticize Christian religion based upon what this group did. Normally, though, they just followed the dishonest tactic of saying Christians believe X and X is immoral or evil or awful or stupid or irrational. And if you were to say Christians don't believe X, they'll say some Christians do. Quite often, no Christian believes X. And obviously when I say X, I'm referring to any sort of complaint that they lodge against Christianity, any sort of claim they make. But even if you could find some Christians who believe X, if they say Christianity is immoral or evil or awful or irrational or stupid because Christians believe X, they are not limiting their complaint to fundamentalists, for example, one of their favorite targets. They're not limiting their concerns to some Christians. They're saying Christians. They're using it as an argument to delegitimize Christianity, and they are blaming all Christians. Just like they're blaming the Catholic Church for the creation of the Triple K, even though the Catholic Church was victims of the Triple K. And they like pretending you said something you didn't say in response, so they could pretend they addressed it when they really didn't. At any rate, I shall take my leave of you now. I think I've said enough on this topic. I'm hoping either next week or the week after I will have a proper shoot a bit video, and if you don't know what the shoot a bit is, take the word shoot and take the word bit, put them together, then reverse them to create something that sounds rather like bite shout, and you will find that I have a channel on the forbidden plains of the shoot a bit, far from the gaze of Al Gore, who jealously guards his rhythm. And I will attempt to speak more normally. I've actually managed to speak more normally in this video with the hopes it goes up. But that's because, even though I brought up Charlie Chaplin, wink wink nudge nudge, that was not the main focus. At any rate, I'm hoping that my presentation has improved. This is my first video on this specific topic. Under the new rubric, I will, not counting of course the practice videos, I intend to release a better one on the same topic later, not necessarily next week. And I have little else to say now. This was still a bit muddled, because I'm deliberately avoiding certain problems, but I'm hoping you got the point across, even though it is muddled. And I am hoping to do one properly on the shoot a bit. This video will also go on the shoot a bit, but this week I didn't have time to make 2 separate videos. So, I shall take my leave of you now. Thank you, God bless, and goodbye.